While we're changing panels, I'd like to also acknowledge the presence of Assemblyman Mark Molinaro, who's joined us. And go back.
Thank you. For this panel, we have Mr. George Pablo, the Director of EPA Region 2's Emergency and Remedial Response Division, Ms. Val Washington, the Deputy Commissioner of Remediation and Materials Management with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and Dr. G. Anders Carlson, Director of the Division of Environmental Health Investigation in the New York State Department of Health. We thank you very much for being here, and your full statements will be placed in the record, so we ask if you could try to limit your testimony to 5 minutes as a courtesy to other witnesses. And again, we will proceed in the order in which the witnesses are listed in the call for the hearing. Mr. Pablo, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, for the invitation to appear here today on behalf of the U.S. EPA. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss EPA's efforts to address actions that we have taken at the Superfund sites in New York's 19th Congressional District. EPA considers vapor intrusion from contaminated soils or groundwater into homes and buildings to be a significant environmental concern, and one in which the science is still evolving. EPA and New York State have paid increased attention to indoor air concerns at sites where soil or groundwater is contaminated with volatile organic compounds. Given the complexity of the evolving science in this area and the difficulty of relating contamination in the soil and groundwater to indoor air, EPA's approach to determine whether there is a concern at a given location is to conduct sampling from beneath a building and of the indoor air environment when the possibility of vapor intrusion at levels of concern cannot be ruled out. A key point to keep in mind is that individual site characteristics such as geology and soil conditions, as well as chemicals present, can greatly affect the potential for vapor intrusion and may considerably vary from one home to the next. Two common chemicals of concern for vapor intrusion sites are TCE and PCE. These contaminants occur at approximately 1/3 to 1/2 of EPA Superfund sites. The agency's ongoing human health assessment of TCE is a complex scientific activity. EPA had the draft TCE health assessment undergo independent peer review by the agency's Science Advisory Board in 2001, and in September of 2004 did commission a National Academy of Sciences report to assess the critical scientific issues that should be addressed in any health risk assessment of TCE. NAS provided final peer consultation report in July of 2006. The agency is considering the scientific advice of the NAS as well as recently published scientific literature as it proceeds with the development of a new TCE health assessment. The TCE health assessment is a top priority for EPA's chemical assessment program and expects the draft assessment for interagency review in December of 2008, followed by a release of the draft for independent peer review and public comment in 2009. At this point, I would like to address two of the Superfund sites here in the 19th Congressional District, the Hopewell Precision site and the Shenandoah Road site. Though these sites have similar groundwater contamination problems, one site has experienced widespread vapor intrusion while the other site has not. The Hopewell Precision area groundwater contamination was caused by a small manufacturer of sheet metal parts and assemblies who disposed of painting and degreasing waste directly on the ground, resulting in a groundwater contamination, as mentioned, of 1 1/2 miles long. In March 2003, EPA provided a quick response to several contaminated residential wells. Since that time, EPA has sampled 450 residential drinking water wells and installed carbon filtration systems on 39 wells that exceeded the drinking water standard of 5 parts per billion TCE. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation installed similar filtration systems at 14 additional homes where the well water exceeded the state standard of 5 parts per billion trichloroethane, TCA. Between April 2003 and March 2008, EPA conducted sampling at 278 homes to determine whether vapor intrusion into homes has taken place. Today, EPA has installed sub-slab ventilation systems in 53 residences to mitigate the intrusion of TCE vapors into these homes. These ventilation systems have been successful in addressing vapor intrusion problems. At present, EPA has spent $8.5 million in Superfund funds on activities at the Hopewell site. Currently, EPA is doing a remedial investigation and feasibility study as part of the long-term site cleanup phase for this site. We expect to release the report to the public during the summer of 2008. In addition, EPA is also preparing a focused feasibility study to evaluate options for alternative water supplies to address the groundwater plume. We expect this study to be ready later this spring. The Shenandoah Road contamination site is located here in East Fishkill. Investigatory work by New York State DEC and EPA discovered tetrachloroethylene seeping from a 1,200-gallon septic tank, which was responsible for the contaminated water. At this site, the septic tank and the associated contaminated soils, about 6,000 cubic yards, have been removed, and residential wells have been tested. Today, EPA put a total of 105 residential well treatment systems, EPA as well as IBM installed more than 100 residential well treatment systems into homes, and continued monitoring of affected homes and nearby wells is continuing to address the immediate threat. Between April 2004 and March 2008, EPA collected air samples from 78 of the residences in the vicinity of the site to determine vapor intrusion problems. EPA determined that 5 properties should receive vapor mitigation systems. The installation of these systems is expected to be performed by EPA over the next few months. The other homes will continue to be monitored during the winter heating season. EPA has also been working toward a permanent solution to address the groundwater contamination in Shenandoah Road area. The solution involves securing a public water supply system in the area. Under an EPA order, IBM agreed to construct a water line that will serve approximately 150 homes at a cost of around $10 million. Work on this portion of the project is progressing, and the water line is expected to be completed this fall. IBM is also performing a remedial investigation feasibility study for the permanent remedy and should be completed in 2009. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that EPA will continue to work closely with New York State DEC and New York State Department of Health to address all phases of site remediation, including the vapor intrusion issue in New York State. The vapor intrusion issue presents unique challenges that EPA and the states will have to address. As more sites that have vapor intrusion problems are identified, we anticipate the challenge will only get larger. Before I close, I would like to thank Representative Hall for his ongoing interest and support of these sites. Thank you again for the opportunity to address the subcommittee. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll now hear from Ms. Washington.
Thank you, Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Bozeman, Congressman Hall. Thank you very much for bringing the subcommittee to the Mid-Hudson Valley. It's an honor to have you here, and we appreciate you coming all this way. Commissioner Brannis asked me to thank you as well for giving us the opportunity to testify here. Our experience with environmental remediation, as you know, here in New York goes way back. Love Canal was really the genesis of both the federal Superfund laws and the state Superfund law. And our experience has grown, and it's included new problems as they emerge. We've seen a lot of these problems associated with brownfield remediation, and we've talked a lot today about the unique and enigmatic contamination from vapor intrusion. Starting with the Superfund programs, just briefly, I'm going to do my best to try not to repeat what others have said about some of these problems, but I want to say that over the years we've listed 2,266 sites in New York as posing a significant threat to the environment, which is our standard for state Superfund. And more than half of these have been fully remediated, which means that there's still a substantial number that are being addressed or still need to be addressed. It's a huge problem. We have developed a very successful partnership with EPA and, of course, with the Department of Health in cleaning up the 86 sites that are on the national priorities list. But we are also always adding to our list of contaminated sites. A few A few reach the Superfund status every year, but there are many thousands of others. We have 16,000 petroleum spills every year. We know that there are thousands of brownfields. There's no complete inventory, as you know. Hundreds have participated in our various brownfields programs, but we have a long way to go in cleaning up these sites, many of which are plaguing our cities. Buffalo is 40% brownfields. With this level of challenge, it is really important to fully fund the remedial programs that have been enacted at the state and federal level. New York has put a lot of money into these programs, as has the federal government, but we really do need new funding for the federal Superfund. Over the years, federal government has spent $0.75 billion on Superfund sites in New York. These are estimated numbers. New York, $1.39 billion, and responsible parties, $4.51 billion. And I mention these numbers to point out that what drives that 68% that is being paid for by private parties is the fact that the federal government has the money, or in the past has had the money, to clean up these sites, and when negotiations aren't working out, they can take action and then go back and get recompense later. But that's an important statistic, the fact that we have been able to leverage 68% of the money that has been spent on state and federal Superfund sites in New York by having the ability to have that threat that we will go in if they don't and clean up these sites. So again, I'm urging, the Commissioner is urging that we fully fund the federal Superfund. It is really important to all these programs. It's also equally important for the state and federal government to enjoy a strong partnership to protect the public health from releases of hazardous substances, and we have that successful partnership in New York. I want to say a little bit about our program for vapor intrusion in New York State. For every site, we are looking at the potential for vapor intrusion wherever there are volatile or organic chemicals, VOCs, TEC, of course, prominent among them. We are also going back and looking at the Superfund sites, state and federal Superfund sites that have been cleaned up already, that have been closed. And we're going back and, again, looking at those sites that have the potential for posing a vapor intrusion problem. These are, we refer to these as legacy sites. As far as I know, we are the only state in the entire country that is doing this. The federal government, again, has been very cooperative in working with us in doing this. 55 of these sites where there is potential for vapor intrusion at these closed, already remediated legacy sites are federal Superfund sites, and EPA is addressing every one of them. We recognize Congressman Hall's bill, HR 5527, and its purpose of developing tight protective standards for TCE is a very laudable goal. We, again, have our own approach to TCE in New York. I think it's very sophisticated. Dr. Carlson, I think, will talk more about it. And we look forward to working with Congress and with EPA in developing a national approach to TCE. Again, I thank you for the opportunity on behalf of Commissioner Granish for letting us testify today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Carlson.
Good morning, Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Boozman, and Congressman Hall. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I come here with greetings also from Commissioner Daines. The New York State Department of Health participates as a partner with DEC and EPA and the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry in investigating, evaluating, and responding to reported instances of toxic chemicals in the environment, and particularly inactive Superfund sites and active RCRA facilities. The Department's role is to assure that appropriate data are collected to evaluate existing or potential human exposures. The Department considers toxicity of chemicals, the nature of exposures, and, as necessary, carries out epidemiological studies to identify adverse health outcomes. Further outreach and education materials are developed for the community and physicians as we make the progress or endeavor to identify processes that can reduce, eliminate the exposures to human beings. During the evaluation of the potential health impacts at federal sites such as Hopewell Precision, the department partners with ATSDR to develop public health assessments. A public health assessment is an evaluation that is conducted to determine whether or not, to what extent, people have exposed to hazardous substances from a site. If the assessment indicates there have been exposures, the associated risks and possible health effects, particularly for children, are examined. Community concerns are considered as follow-up actions are developed to reduce exposures. The evaluation results in a public health action plan that offers measures to protect the community. As part of my testimony, I have provided a copy of our public health assessment for the Hopewell Precision Area Contamination, and this document is also available on our webpage. The public health assessment makes several recommendations that were directed at reducing exposures to contaminated drinking water and contaminated soil vapors. This has been done by fully defining the contamination in the area and maintaining the appropriate treatment systems to mitigate exposures. As the Public Health Assessment Action Plan, part of it, the department continues to work with the communities of Hopewell Junction and Shenandoah Road to include them in the New York State's Volatile Organic Chemical Exposure Registry. The Exposure Registry was established in 1999 as a tool to evaluate health assessment, health status, and provide for long-term follow-up for communities and individuals with exposures, documented exposures to VOCs. The registry is currently evaluating exposures and health status of New York State residents at locations across the state where drinking water or indoor air has been compromised from landfills, industrial spills, or other sources. People enrolled in the registry are kept informed as the process goes on. For the Hopewell Precision and Shenandoah Road sites, sampling information was used to identify impacted households. Questionnaires requesting information concerning exposures and health outcomes were distributed to 75 Shenandoah Road households in 2000, and in 2003, contact was made with 47 Hopewell Precision households who had private well contamination, and in 2006, with 192 homes where there were soil vapor intrusion issues. We had a 61% response rate at Shenandoah Road and a 26% response rate at Hopewell Junction. And I think, an aside, Ms. Hall made mention of the problem of getting people to respond, and it is a very real problem that we deal with. But we proceed with that by dealing with, as she mentioned, looking at statistical data. We're now underway looking at existing health outcome data that the state has through our vital records, which is our birth certificates and information on that they contain, the New York State Congenital Malformations Registry and the New York State Cancer Registry. Data are being analyzed to evaluate possible adverse birth outcomes, some of which are low birth weights, congenital malformations, and cancer for both Shenandoah Road and Hopewell Junction, along with the other sites in New York State. These data will be used to compare levels of adverse health outcomes in impacted areas to levels with the rest of the state, excluding New York City. This type of review, called a health statistics review, cannot link cause and effects, but can suggest relationships that merit additional research. We expect to complete the outcome portion of this evaluation in the spring of 2009 and the cancer incidence study about 6 months later. The department staff work with Hopewell Precision residents in defining the boundary of the study, and for the the communities will be engaged as the project moves on. Once completed, the report will be shared with the residents and other stakeholders, but we will present it in a manner so that personal, confidential health information will not be compromised. In summary, I would say we, in collaboration with ATSDR, the department developed a comprehensive evaluation of environmental contamination and around the sites to identify the exposures. We've developed the health studies that we're carrying out, and we've worked with ATSDR, EPA, and DEC in the community as we work to continue to mitigate exposures. I think at this point I would say thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you again, and I will certainly be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carlson. This has been our first round of questions. Mr. Pablo, you indicated that some of the findings of the multiple studies have been delayed due to more recent scientific information, while we know that the threat to the health continues to go on. Have you recommended doing something, and then if you find more current scientific information, it could be modified?
The Office of Research and Development in EPA Washington is responsible for all these evaluations in terms of the new sciences as they come out. However, the guidance from Washington that we have right now does not preclude us from using the latest and best credible science, such that when we do have to make decisions regarding vapor intrusion in houses in Hopewell Precision, it would allow us to install those systems on the basis of the new credible science, because the guidance says, use the line of evidence that you have at your disposal to make site-specific decisions, such that we are able to install mitigation systems in houses where not even the vapor intrusion has reached the house. In other words, if we do find it in the soil gas matrix, the vapors, the soil gas matrix underneath a house exceeding a certain level of concentration, we are allowed to go into the houses and install those mitigation systems before the intrusion happens. So I do have that flexibility to act, and we have acted in that regard as well.
Okay. You stated that the TCE assessment is top priority for EPA's chemical assessment program. What does that mean, to be top priority?
It is a priority for the Office of Research and Development to conduct a chemical assessment. They have reviewed all the recommendations from the National Academy of the Sciences. They are following up with those recommendations to the point where by the end of this calendar year, they're going to be preparing a report for interagency review, meaning that it will eventually go to the Office of Management and Budget. It will be reviewed by other, scientific agencies of the government, for example, like NASA, Department of Defense, the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. They're going to get those comments, and then eventually they're going to consolidate those and address those comments such that by the following year they can issue that report for a peer review, an independent peer review. Now, I have to stop at that point because I really do not know what those comments are going to be from a peer review perspective. There could be issues that they may, raise to the point where it may be delayed in terms of finalizing that report.
Thank you. Now, I understand at one point a few years ago, EPA proposed a TCE risk concentration of 2.5 micrograms per cubic meter. When did this get proposed?
I wouldn't say it was proposed. It was our guidance allows us to do these risk assessments on the basis of toxicity values that we use for TCE. The level that corresponds to the 1 in a million, one additional cancer per a million people, that would translate to approximately 1.6 micrograms per cubic meter. However, the standardized methodology that you use to detect whether or not you're achieving that level can only get you down to 2.6 micrograms per cubic meter. However, there are other sensitive analyses that we can use that can get us down to 0.38. I know I'm getting, very specific in terms of the numbers. The point I'm trying to make is that the 10 to the minus 6 level, risk level, using the latest science that we have would be 1.6 micrograms per cubic meter. Mm-hmm. Now, keep in mind that other people may be using 5, micrograms per cubic meter, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, their science is wrong and our science is right. It all has to do with the risk assessments that we use and the assumptions that we have made and the risk management decisions that we have made to come up with those numbers. But the bottom line is that they are both in the same risk range. One is 1 times 10 to the minus 6. The other one may be 3 times 10 to the minus 6. But they're in the acceptability range for us, for using those numbers.
I know that industry challenged the standard. Did that have any effect on the final decision?
Usually, I really am not the expert, in terms of what the industry has, submitted in terms of their comments and their challenges. But I can assure you that, EPA, at least on our level, uses the latest and best credible, and I stress the word credible science, every time we need to make a decision.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ms. Washington, what has New York DEC found in its vapor intrusion follow-up evaluations of closed legacy sites?
Well, I believe there's about 421 of these. We've probably sampled thousands of houses around the state, and we've put in systems in literally hundreds. The sites that we have in the mid-Hudson Valley, these legacy sites, we have a number of them, and right now these are being evaluated right now. So that would be Pauling Rubber, Texaco Research Center, Orange County Landfill. These were closed a long time ago, the old Altieri landfill. They are undergoing these analyses right now.
Okay. You did state that reauthorization of the federal Superfund should be a top priority. What are the on-the-ground implications for contaminated sites in New York? And if we continue along our current path of not reauthorizing the Superfund?
Well, the problem doesn't really show up at the sites, the kind of sites we've been talking about today, the high-profile sites with large impacted populations. I think those are where the government is being most aggressive in trying to get things done. I think it's the smaller sites. A lot of sites in Western New York are lagging behind perhaps where they should because these negotiations are protracted. It's easy for people to hide, and without the threat of the government going in and cleaning up these sites, they're just sitting there. But again, they tend to be the smaller sites with a lower impact. I think there is a very good effort on EPA's part, and obviously DOH and DEC to prioritize and get to the sites where there are big impacts.
Have you compared the sites here with other parts of the country?
In terms of what? Vapor intrusion?
Vapor intrusion, or the number of sites, or?
Well, the number of sites, we're up there with the other industrial countries. I don't know if I've ever seen an actual comparison of number of sites, but we are one of the more contaminated sites as a Rust Belt state.
Yes.
It is an evolving issue, and I think the more we test for these sites, the more vapor intrusion sites we're going to be finding. It's just that it was brought up to the national level only recently in the last couple of years. So we are gearing up essentially to study vapor intrusion into houses, because long before that, one assumed that if the groundwater was contaminated in low levels, less than the drinking water standard, that these vapors wouldn't necessarily intrude and rise into people's houses, but that's not the case. Our own experience here in the region, because this has been a high priority for us here in the region, indicates that it doesn't necessarily matter what's in the groundwater. You have, and I think, the past, testimony from one of the previous panelists indicated that in some cases where you may not detect anything in the groundwater, there remains enough residual vapor in the soil to allow it to rise at some point in time. Going along, the lines of, what, Val Washington was indicating, we in Region 2 are, having the prime responsibility for evaluating all of the Superfund sites here in New York State. We have about 103 of those national priority list sites, and we have gone through a lot of technical evaluation to determine whether or not a whole lot of these sites are at risk. And if I can give you some statistics, we determined that 29 of those 103 sites, we ruled out that they are not at risk. We sampled 34 of them. 18 of them, we discovered that it doesn't really matter at this point in time because there was no development on top of these sites. just taking into consideration Homeland Precision, as a Superfund site, we have a stretch of 1.5 miles long of the plume that we have to consider. In some sites in rural New York, in upstate New York, there are no houses for us to determine. We are doing a remedial investigation for 3 of them, and we have an additional 19 to evaluate because we can only, and we prefer to do this work during the heating season when the vapor intrusion becomes a little more dominant in terms of detecting it and allowing it to remain in the house because of, the ventilation is not there to allow it to escape.
Any health impacts determined?
Well, usually, I don't know, Andy, if you want to, address that, but usually TCE does affect the central, nervous, system.
I think New York, we've worked closely with EPA in our process for dealing with vapor intrusion, and we have a very similar approach, but we have developed a general air guideline for several chemicals, but particularly for TCE of 5 micrograms per cubic meter. And this has been questioned, is this protective or not? But what needs to be understood, besides that we went through a rigorous toxicological review of all the available data, and in fact, we had developed our number prior to the NAS, National Academy of Sciences report coming out, and their conclusions affirmed the methods and the processes we used in developing our number. We also had it peer-reviewed by an expert panel that included toxicologists, chemists, and other science, including a chemist that's involved in one of the larger vapor intrusion communities in the state, at Endicott, that was brought to us by IBM. And we've developed a matrix method where we compare indoor air levels to subslab levels. And the way that process works is we, in fact, do mitigate homes when there is no explicit evidence of contamination in the home from vapor intrusion if there are elevated levels of soil gas under the home, because we see that as a potential. So we do many, many mitigations on the basis of potential. And in effect, we're cleaning up when we find less than a microgram per cubic meter in the indoor air. So we have a general air guideline which says if it's above that, you're doing it regardless of what you want to do. But we can still carry out the mitigations at much lower levels. Our numbers include both the cancer and non-cancer endpoints, so it's a comprehensive number that deals with the full health, potential health impacts.
And when the Department of Health is doing this analysis and this comparison between the sub-slab and the indoor air, many times we get anomalous results because there are other sources of TCE besides soil vapor gas. So right. You'll get, we've actually, with the Department of Health, gone into homes, obviously with the owner's permission, and done fairly complete inventories of what's in their cleaning closet and what's in their garages. There are still a lot of very toxic chemicals in cleaning products. Some of them are older products that have been sitting around. These things have gotten better over the years. But TCE, sometimes we get these anomalous results where you won't have anything in the sub-slab, and then the house will have this fairly high levels of contamination.
And this is an important point. When we, as Val said, we do comprehensive inventories of what people have in their homes. And this is one of the reasons we prefer to just proceed to mitigation. This is one of the things that makes sampling expensive, because it's a time-consuming activity. It's somewhat intrusive on people's lives, but we find a lot of chemicals in people's homes. We also do ambient air so that we know whether or not there's a source that's other than. And by doing this, we're actually able to get a really comprehensive picture of what the sources are and what the potential exposures are. We've been able to help a lot of people clean their houses out with other chemicals that we weren't concerned with, because when we do sample, we don't just sample for TCE or PCE. We do a suite of organic chemicals and can provide the homeowners with a great deal of information about what may be in their homes.
Just, EPA follows the same protocols and procedures as well, in terms of identifying, commonly used households before we go in there and actually do the testing. But just to give you a point of reference, we have been able to reduce the cost of each mitigation system down to about $1,000. We have Don Graham here, who, spent 5 years up here, studying the area. But to give you an appreciation of how much it costs to, do one measurement, one sampling event here, it's in the neighborhood of about $3,000. So it makes sense for us, from a cost-effective, or cost-benefit analysis, if we do find something in the soils, in the ground, to, instead of us having to go back a year from now and do the same sampling at a lot more money just to give comfort to the homeowner and save some money for the government as well, we would install that system.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Mr. Bozeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Carlson and Ms. Washington, do we need, in your opinion, do we need to be doing anything else to protect the human health from exposure to TCE in the area?
That's really the question that led us to our current program. Again, other states aren't doing what we're doing. What we did have this concern. We have Massachusetts was mentioned with this environmental results program. We're doing a similar thing with the dry cleaners. We need to do more, and I don't think self-certification is enough. I think it has had great results, but for so many of these things, you really want to get in there and do the inspections. I think our bulk storage programs have proven that. So yes, I mean, I think we have to go back and we have to look at dry cleaners. We have to look at other possible sources. This is emerging. This vapor intrusion has become an issue only in the last few years, and I will say New York is ahead of the curve. And one measure of that is our engineers that have been at the cutting edge of this work, as well as the DOH folks that have studied the health implications and so forth, are speaking all over the country. We're invited to conferences all over the country where people are learning from our experience.
Very good.
And following up on that, I think one of the things that gives strength to our program, other than that we're going back to all the old sites, and vapor intrusion is a principal element of all new investigations. Many of the other states make their decisions based on modeling. They have a few sample points and they crank them in doing a commuter model and say, oh, vapor intrusion's not a problem. Well, we looked at that very closely in the beginning and found where we had some data and cranked it in, and it would say no problem, and we had houses that had significant issues with them, and we made the decision that modeling is not our watchword, sampling is. We're spending the money, as George said, $2,000 to $3,000 per house to sample. When we have a neighborhood where we know there's an extensive problem, we don't necessarily sample every home, but we sample enough to know the pattern, and that's when we go into what we've become to call blanket mitigation, but it is in effect what was done in Hopewell Precision. We don't sample everything. We've got a problem here. We're going to address it, and we, excuse me, we make the offer to all the folks, and there's a small number that don't want it, and just add there's a spin-off benefit because this is the same system we use to protect homes from radon. And so we get an additional benefit from that by getting a lot of homes that otherwise haven't been protected. And a lot of these sites have been just by happenstance in high counties in New York State that have high radon problems. So that's been an additional benefit.
You mentioned that you were at 5 parts per million on as far as the reference for safety. So would you say that in reading the current literature, and visiting with your buddies that are in the same position that you're in, supposedly keeping up with these things, are you comfortable with that, with the current literature?
Well, first, let me correct, it's 5 micrograms per cubic meter for air. This is an air number. There are a lot of numbers out there. California has a number that's reported at 0.16. There's other numbers that are, in that range. But the issue for us is we're applying it, we're using it. California actually, they have an air criteria number of 0.16, but they have a response level for vapor intrusion of 122. So we'll have to be careful when people enunciate, state a number that's their response number. You have to look at what they're really doing. And in our case, this is a general air guideline that we have developed that says over an individual's entire lifetime, they should not be exposed on an ongoing basis to levels that exceed that. We're using that as a response to what we hope are very short-term exposures, and as a basis, a jumping off point for beginning the process to define cleanup. So that to answer your question directly, we believe it's protective. That number, as I said, includes both cancer and non-cancer outcomes. If you look at the risk ranges that are used to develop responses to Superfund sites, our number of 5, just as a cancer-based number, is in the range of 0.6 times 10 to the minus 6 to 1.5 times 10 to the minus 5. Now, under the Superfund program, the risk range, acceptable risk range for a cleanup is 10 to the minus 6 to 10 to the minus 4. So we're well within that risk range for that 5. There will be, with time, new science that comes out, and if the new science says that there's a need to change, a need to reevaluate, we will. Our toxicologists are continually evaluating the literature, so we endeavor to stay on top of the science that is being developed around all the chemicals that we have for concerns at hazardous waste sites.
Very good. Mr. Pavlo, I appreciate your all's work and appreciate working with the agency. And it sounds like today that as far as working with the individuals, you know, and again, the collaboration that we've got with the state is going very, very well. There was some concern about, you know, things taking a while and being perhaps a little bureaucratic, and I can understand that. And that's something that certainly we need to work on very, very hard. The other thing that was mentioned was maybe a little bit, in some situations, a little concerned about the communication back and forth as to what we're going to do in the future, you know, what's being done. And so I would really encourage, and again, I know everybody gets busy, those are things that we can fix very easily.
Sure.
And I'd really encourage you to do that. So again, I appreciate the fact that your scorecard by the gentleman in his testimony was pretty good. So. One thing, though, that does bother me, you know, we've got this TCE thing, you know, going on, and in your testimony you talked about the original 2001 draft, you know, so this thing probably was started in the, you know, I don't know, 1999s or 98s or whatever. So, you know, it's really been dragging on now for 9 or 10 years. You do the original study, you go through the whole process, and then, you know, you decide you're going to do another study because of new information or whatever. We're at the process now where you had the National Academy of Sciences do a report, you know, based on, that came out in July of 2006. And then you're talking about having to peer review that, you know, and the other. I mean, at some point, we really do have to make a decision, you know, based on the evidence. Now, if we use the idea that, you know, as things change, you know, we can't make a decision because it might change in the future, it's changed, whatever, you just can't operate that way. I mean, we do operate that way sometimes in government, but it really is frustrating. I mean, you know, things in private enterprise, we wouldn't get anything done if it were done that way. Things wouldn't move forward. So we need to make a decision. And so I would really appreciate it if you would convey, you know, my wishes, and I think the wishes of the committee, that we really move forward. And you know, what I would like, Madam Chair, is maybe to follow up on this in the future, and either written or have somebody come in and just visit with us. You know, we're 6 months from now. What's the progress, you know, that's been made? And then just follow up, you know, in a reasonable length of time, you know, as to the progress that we're making. When do you feel like I say, this has been going on for the last 8 years at least? What is a reasonable time that we can expect a report that gives a decision?
Sir, I will convey, you know, those recommendations and those observations of you and the chairwoman and Congressman Hall.
And those aren't unreasonable as a scientist and I mean, those aren't for you, and if you, Dr. Carlson, as well. I mean, that's not an unreasonable request, is it?
Well, I wouldn't view it, to be unreasonable if it was a simple matter, of science. At the same time, though, I will convey your wishes and your recommendations and observations to my peers in Washington and let them know that, this was, discussed at this congressional hearing and that there is a sense of urgency to finalize the science as we know it right now. And if there were to be changes in terms of, what that health assessment, should be in terms of the toxicity values of TCE, to make those changes later on. So I will convey that sense.
So do you have a feeling for when we can get a final?
I am not the person in charge of that, sir, so I will convey that to those who are, working on it in Washington.
Good. Well, again, that's something else maybe we could have a written, question in that regard and submit it to the agency. But, and don't misunderstand, like I said, I think the feeling I've gotten today, as far as your work, as far as the agency's work, has been very positive. And the other thing that you've done is realizing, you really haven't stuck to that. You've actually exceeded that, in some cases in the area, in the sense that, so you're really doing, what you're supposed to. But again, I think that we do need to get on the stick and get the,
Sure.
A final thing. So we appreciate your hard efforts. And then also, I'm encouraged, the testimony that you've talked about, the Massachusetts model, and it sounds like you all have even maybe improving on that and preventing, we got to clean up what we've done. There's no excuse for having the same thing happen over and over again in the future. And so I appreciate the state, being very proactive in that regard and really becoming a model for the rest of the country. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And following up on Mr. Bozeman's comments, I want to compliment Director Pavlo on his work. You have a good reputation with people around here, and I would also note for the record that we asked for representatives of EPA from the Washington office who are in a position to answer those questions to come here today, and I'm disappointed to say that they declined to join us, but we're happy to have you here, sir. And I wanted to ask a couple of questions, if we could, just about some of the other sites that we haven't touched on that are in the 19th Congressional District, starting with the Carroll and Doobies, I think that's how it's pronounced, the sewage disposal site in Port Jervis, which is a Superfund site that's designated as construction complete, although it has not yet been deleted from the national priority list. Tell us what the current status of that is.
The contaminant source areas have been remediated, and the groundwater at this site is being remediated through what we call natural attenuation. In other words, the levels of contamination are not that high as to require active, treatment, but, through a reasonable amount of time, we should be able to achieve, acceptable levels. I would say that, and once we achieve, the contaminant levels, to the point where they meet groundwater standards, then we should be able to say that, that remedy, is effective, and we should be able to proceed to delete that site from the national priorities list. I would say that we do not anticipate at this point in time that we should be able to do so in the next 5 years. I would like to stress, because before we're talking about the groundwater and how long it takes for it to clean up. Unfortunately, in the beginning of the program, our experience was that if we, have contamination in the groundwater, we put an extraction, a pump and treat system, we should be able to clean up the groundwater over a 30-year period. Our experience so far indicates that we were very, very wrong. We were not even near, in terms of how long it will take to, treat groundwater and achieve drinking water levels. I would say it wouldn't be unusual if it were to take 100 years to achieve, drinking water levels. Once you contaminate the groundwater, it remains contaminated above drinking water standards for a long, long time.
So in other words, we shouldn't contaminate it if it can possibly help it in the
Yes,
first
exactly.
place.
We should prevent it, yes.
Let me just veer off of my previous line of questioning and ask you what the proper legal method for disposing of TCE is for an industrial operation.
At this point in time, we have the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, as we know it, that if you do have, TCE contamination, there are permitted facilities that should be taken, to properly dispose of it. There are, people who recycle, TCE.
Any idea what that costs for the?
I do not know the cost, no.
It's more costly than dumping on the ground.
Oh yeah, far, far more.
So basically, an industry that's making a profit and dumping TCE or any similar chemical on the ground is doing it to save money.
That or they are either
Or they don't
criminal,
realize what
under
they're
the
doing.
present regulations, or, they are doing it recklessly, I would say, yes.
And so that's the theory behind the tax on the polluters that was dropped in 1995, or allowed to expire in 1995. The theory for the polluter paying is that they're making a profit in the first place, and therefore they should be the ones who pay for the cleanup. Let me just jump back to the Katona Municipal Well. That site's been deleted. Is that one being monitored? Maybe Ms. Washington, you can tell us if that's.
I'm sorry, sir, I didn't hear that. last part.
Katona, Village
Right.
of Katona, the municipal well that was
That has
contaminated.
been deleted from the national priorities list, yes, sir.
Okay, so that one, as far as we're concerned, is done.
Yes,
Is it an Apira Chemical Company site in Maybrook in Orange County?
yes.
Once again, it's not expected to be done within 5 years. Is that,
Well, that one, we selected the remedy for, the remediation of the site back in September of 2007. On that one, the site is located in Captainburg, New York. The remedy that we selected for that site, called for the treatment of the soils, as well as the remediation of the groundwater as well. So we did select the remedy. We are in negotiations with, the company that caused the contamination in Apira to perform the work, as the decision of EPA dictated. I would imagine once we complete the negotiations, it would take them about a year or so to design the remedy, and then another few years to do the construction work.
thank you. Is there any evidence of vapor intrusion either at Katona or at the Apira site?
I can provide that information to you later on, but all of the I don't have it at hand right now, but have we?
Yeah.
There is none. Okay,
Okay.
there is none, yeah.
Okay, and Warwick landfill?
Warwick landfill, I do not believe so either.
I'm just
we
looking for a
have-
quick, couple sentence status report on it if
Right.
you can.
Well, on that one, it's a landfill, as you know, that, we selected the remedy, and it's a 20-acre, landfill, and we capped the landfill, with a synthetic liner back in September of 1998. And we continue with the operation and monitoring, aspects of the program. And this is, again, work performed by the potentially responsible parties. It's costing them about $44,000 a year to maintain the cap that was placed on the landfill, and we did delete this site from the national priorities list in July of 2001. So the work
Okay.
has been done and was completed.
Okay. I wanted to ask Dr. Carlson, Director Carlson, do low amounts of these VOCs have a greater effect on infants or people with compromised immune systems?
Well, infants and people with compromised systems and the elderly are more sensitive to them, but our guidelines are developed, our guidelines and standards are all developed with those segments of the population in mind. So they're very carefully considered when we develop our numbers.
Who pays for the implementation of the PHA plan, and is there any federal cost share?
The implementation of the PHA plan is part of the overall process of the cleanup program, and so we do some of the work with our cooperative agreement with ATSDR, some of the work is done as a part of the remedy for the site, which is either then paid for if EPA is, if it's a responsible party site, the responsible party's paying for it. If they're not available, EPA is carrying it out, and then we'll presumably look for cost recovery if that's an option, according to the kinds of numbers that Ms. Washington suggested earlier about our effectiveness in recovering the cost for carrying out these remedies.
And with regard to the review of existing outcomes for evaluating vapor intrusion impacts, are there any preliminary findings? Could you speculate that those findings may be consistent with what we already know about the health impacts?
You're talking about what we anticipate coming out of the studies that we're doing now? No, I wouldn't endeavor to speculate because, you know, we don't have the data yet. The preliminary information that we gathered from questionnaires that we did sent to all the individuals that we asked to participate in our program did not indicate unusual numbers. So that's why we're looking at data that are more defined by the reporting requirements that we have for other aspects of a health evaluation.
Thank you. And Deputy Commissioner Washington, I wanted to ask you, in your testimony you refer to the incentive for polluters to stall that is created by failure to reauthorize Superfund. Are you encountering this in response to New York's program as well? Would reauthorization bolster New York's program?
New York has a fairly robust program. We've had significant funding appropriated by the legislature for our state Superfund program. So we don't have the same problem.
I'm glad to hear there seems to be a strong state and federal cooperation on identified sites. Does this same spirit of cooperation extend to preventative monitoring and enforcement?
I believe it does. I have to tell you that I haven't been that involved in the enforcement program, but yes.
As far as you know?
As far as I know, we have a very good working relationship with EPA.
Good. I've always been proud that New York is leading on issues of environmental protection and public health, so I'm pleased to hear you describe the ongoing efforts to create parameters for vapor intrusion and TCE exposure. Is there any reason why these models would not be transferable to the federal level?
I believe they are transferable. Yeah. And I think we've had discussions with EPA.
Yes.
And have been involved in the ongoing, you know,
so,
to figure out the strategies for going forward.
So as EPA decides what the standard will be, they'll consider, among other things, the information that comes from New York State and other states.
But I think it's important, you know, if you're talking about nationwide, that's one thing, but I think our experience in New York, and I believe it's similar in New Jersey, basically the Region 2 area, is that we are carrying out a program. Our programs are consistent. We not only work cooperatively, but our approach is very, very similar, and our outcomes are equivalent.
Both decision matrices that, you know, New York State, you know, DOH as well as DEC develop, you know, we're, you know, extensively, you know, discussed with EPA. EPA share the decision-making matrix, so we are consistent, and we do have and enjoy excellent, you know, working relationship between the three agencies. Nothing gets done without the three of us agreeing on something. Otherwise, we don't proceed.
Well, I'm glad you all get along so well.
We do.
Ms. Washington, how are the investigatory and financial burdens between EPA and New York State shared on sites that eventually make it onto the NPL list?
Normally, the federal government takes the lead on those sites. We enter into cooperative agreements where the state shares 10%.
Okay. And lastly, I wanted to ask Director Pavlo, since, you know, the big site that we've spoken about that runs through the 19th District, but we don't think about a lot because it's so big, and it's not the immediate impact that Hopewell Precision has, for instance. is the Hudson River itself is a Superfund
sir.
site.
Yes, it is.
And is in the process of being remediated. Can you tell us anything? Are you involved with that, or does that go north of your?
I'm very, very involved with that site. I'm glad to say that dredging will begin, of the Hudson River, next year in 2009. We were able to secure an agreement with General Electric back in September of 2005, for them to undertake the work, the first phase of the dredging of the work of the river. As we speak, they are building what I would label as a chemical city to, treat the sediments as they are dredging them from the Hudson River. They're going to be taking, all of these sediments to a 100-acre site on the banks of the Champlain Canal in Fort Edward. They're going to be dewatering all of those sediments. And then they're going to be transporting those sediments to Texas, of all places, back in the western, area of Texas via rail,
Not Dallas.
I'm sorry, no. It's a place, I forget the name of the county, but it's towards New Mexico, that boundaries, the boundary, of New Mexico. But the sediment dewatering facility will be ready and will be tested by the end of this calendar year. We were able to withstand legal challenges by the local municipality up there to the point where we won in the district court. It was appealed in a higher court, and the appeal decision was made back in January of this year, endorsing EPA's work as well. So without any further legal challenges, we should be able to proceed with the dredging of that river.
And this is what they call environmental dredging. It's a suction.
Yes,
it's not the big clamshell.
No. It's not mechanical dredging to the extent that you resuspend everything. This is going to be secure environmental dredging, such that the clams that they're going to be using are going to be airtight, that it secures everything in there, such that if there is resuspension, it's going to be minimized. But we also developed what we call engineering performance standards, such that if there were to be resuspension exceeding the drinking water standards in the river, which is our standard that they need to achieve, we would essentially either slow down the operations or go back and find out what's causing those violations. We developed quality of life standards for the communities up there, such that whatever we do is not going to impact their way of life or their health in any way. So this is one of the most studied rivers in the country, and I'm glad to say that eventually we're proceeding to the point where dredging will begin, and the implementation of the remedy is going to begin next year.
Well, thank you, Director Pavlou, and all of the witnesses for being here and for the work that you're doing, and look forward to continuing to hopefully. The thought of 100 years to clean up groundwater is boggling my mind, but it makes it all that much more important that we catch, whether it's household hazardous waste, Dr. Carlson was mentioning, or whether it's industrial solvents that are being used in some process in industry. We need to make sure they don't enter the groundwater to begin with, so we don't have to go down this road. And thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall. And let me thank Dr. Carlson, Ms. Washington, and Mr. Pablo for your testimony, and the other witnesses as well. This completes our public hearing, and we do plan to follow up in 6 months.
Thank you so much.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
Again, I want to thank Mr. Hall for inviting us here. We're on the Veterans Affairs Committee also, and work together in that area, helping you guys out there that are veterans, trying to make sure that we do the benefits that we've promised you in the past, and we appreciate his advocacy in that area also. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and that ends our public hearing.